Good afternoon and welcome to the CABE for Women celebration of International Women's Day 2025. The day actually falls tomorrow on Saturday, but we're celebrating today. My name is Lindsey Richards and I'm chair of the CABE for Women group, and I'll be chairing the event today. Firstly, can I thank CABE and CABE staff for accommodating the event today. It's been great, thank you so much. And before I begin and introduce the panel, we have some housekeeping issues to address. So interacting today, please send in your live questions in the chat option on the side there, and we'll try and answer them as much as we can today. If you're watching this webinar after the broadcast date, please send any questions to myself. My name's Lindsey Richards. I'm chair of the CABE for Women, and we'll be sharing my email address for you to send any questions you have later on. I think, is that it, Rosemary, there? Okay. We've got a fantastic panel today. It includes Caroline Hamilton, who's Chief Executive of the Safety Assessment Federation, Lindsey Richards, immediate past president of the Royal Town Planning Institute. It still seems a little bit strange for me to repeat my name, but I promise not to talk over her when she's giving a presentation. Zoe Cox, Vice President, Chartered Association of Building Engineers, and also our brilliant committee members who I'll be introducing next. Before we start properly, the official theme for International Women's Day 2025 is March Forward. It commemorates 30 years since the United Nations Beijing Declaration and Platform for Action for Achieving Gender Equality. Now, unfortunately, despite positive moves forward, we're disappointingly not where we expected to be 30 years on. And another theme for International Women's Day is Accelerate Action, which emphasises the urgency of making faster strides towards gender equality. The CABE for Women International Women's event is considering this year's Accelerated Action theme, as it fits really well with the urgent need to take action in regard to the current skills gap within our industry and what we can do about that. So I shall start by introducing Caroline Hamilton and ask Caroline to introduce herself, please.
Hi there, Lindsay. So is now my good to go 10 minutes, or do you want me just to... Yeah, right, good. Okay. So I might last the 10 minutes, I might not. But what I wanted to do in introducing myself is really start at the beginning. I think for me, I'm really interested in finding out where people have come from, what were their interests, how did they find their way into that. And given the topics that we're talking about, I think that's really important because we'll get onto it later, but I'm a big believer if you can't be what you can't see. So we need to share experiences and opportunities to understand what that equality of opportunity is. Where is it that I can go? What do I need in terms of skills, academic requirements, etc. So go right back to the beginning. I'm a total geek, love maths, love science. I also loved art, and I was absolutely my dad's shadow when I was a young girl. He worked away from home. He was a welding fabricator. As you can tell by my accent, I'm from the deepest, darkest north in Cumbria. He worked offshore on oil rigs. He worked on the Channel Tunnel. He worked on a pipeline that goes on the seabed from Stranraer to Northern Ireland. And I got to travel to wherever he was working. And I'm not sure health and safety would let us do it now, but I got to get onto a number of sites and really experience what different roles and different professions were about. So I had this great opportunity when I was younger, and I'm not sure those same opportunities are there presently for our young people or people that are thinking about career changes. So I think it's worth talking about these points because they'll relate to things later. In terms of then moving forward, I continued studying. I've just advised one of my friends on the street today that her son's interested in maths. I said, just tell him to keep doing it until he decides what he wants to do, go to sixth form, go to uni. Eventually he'll figure out what he wants to do rather than starting to do it right now. And I think I probably took that advice myself when I was younger. I was first in my family to leave deepest, darkest Cumbria and go off and study. I studied mechanical engineering, so I'm degree educated and have a second degree in nuclear cleanup and nuclear decommission environmental cleanup. Because in Cumbria we have the biggest UK liability with Sellafield, and I worked there for nearly 15 years in projects and consultancy. So that's how I started my career journey. I came back to my local area, really fortunate to get a job with a small consultancy. So I wasn't working directly for the big players. And I think in that's that opportunity of really taking responsibility and accountability early on in your career. Not saying that you don't get that with big employers, but for me, it really worked well because I was in a really secure place with lots of staff around me, but it wasn't huge. I had everybody there that I needed. I then moved into manufacturing, so I went into a paper mill, and as a bit of a geek, the way that paper's made is wonderful. If anybody can get onto manufacturing sites and they enjoy knowing how things are made, things like paper making, they're one of the oldest things that we do. The wasps were doing it right in the back of time. It's really, really interesting. And also looking at things within that sector as to what other countries were doing. So we were Swedish owned and we were looking at what Swedish, Norwegian companies were doing in terms of the environment they were working within, given that they are in these huge forests, and trying to apply some of the principles locally, which is difficult with our governments and councils. And then finally, only my third real main role is where I am now. So it actually snowballed from a little bit of a joke. So I've been based in West Cumbria all of my working life until the 2nd of March 2020. And we all know what was going on then. And that's when I decided to take a job that was in London, so over 300 miles away. And at the time, COVID was commencing. I am the Chief Executive of the Safety Assessment Federation. Our organisation is a trade body, and our members, it's a membership organisation. Our members are testing, inspection or certification companies, those doing conformity assessment or statutory inspections required by the likes of lifting equipment or Lola or pressure equipment. As well as many, many others. And as their trade body, we're their one voice into influencing government, different departments, and also technical outputs in the way of guidance. But we really kind of made our mark in 2020. We've existed for 30 years this year. It was our 25th anniversary in 2020. But early on, we're one of those small niche areas that nobody realises isn't being done until it's not done. And given that hospitals need lifting equipment, which if it isn't checked by our members, then it shouldn't be used. The same principles as a car MOT, really. And the air systems, which at that time, the oxygen that was in those hospitals, and it was the first place that we weren't allowed in. So really, that COVID helped raise our profile and the role of the engineer surveyors, so those that are doing these statutory examinations that exist in every corner, really, of not just the working world, but the world that we touch upon on a daily basis. So maybe the shopping centre that you go to. In my role as Chief Executive of the Safety Assessment Federation, I would say I've continued to be a jack of all trades, wear many, many hats in small organisations, and I hark back to this about the responsibility, accountability aspect, is that in wearing many hats, you're doing many roles, really. Your HR, your training, as well as strategic governance, a board member. So it's really continued to be extremely diverse role, even though I expected narrowing my technical field down to conformity assessment back from the days in project management where it's everything's been included. But I think this is probably me, is that I quite like wearing a lot of different hats and having no 2 days really are ever the same. Does that give you enough of a snapshot of me, Lindsay, and within time?
That's amazing, Caroline, and so interesting. So we're going to come back to a few of the things you brought up there, which actually is within the topic area we wanted to discuss later. So thanks so much for that. Now I'm going to introduce Lindsey Richards. And it still seems strange, Lindsey. Lindsey's the immediate past president of the Royal Town Planning Institute, and she's going to share her experiences with us.
Thank you. It is strange. And we met by accident, didn't we, on LinkedIn in terms of our names. So it's been great to thank you for inviting me to the panel. Yes, so I was president of the Royal Town Planning Institute last year, still part of the presidential team this year as immediate past president. And it's a strange one, really. And quite often when I talk to young people and planning students, I often say, why would anybody want to be a planner? Because, you know, we've seen so many planning reforms and also many sensational headlines blaming, it feels like blaming planners for every failure in the built environment. And quite often when I talk to students and planning students doing postgrads, they've fallen into planning because planning is not raised, I would say, at schools as a career offer, an option. And it's strange because way back, I've 35 years in planning. When I was at school, I had an amazing human geography teacher, and I knew I wanted to do planning. So I went to Sheffield University, I studied planning, and all that time, those 35 years, I've actually spent that in the public sector. And I'll come back to that in terms of, I would say, challenging and pushing those boundaries and why I made that decision. But I started in local government and I would always advocate, and I've always said this to many planning students, which is I think every planner should spend some time in local government. It's the basis of understanding very much protocol processes. And also, I have to say, having some empathy for our local government colleagues as well and the work they do. So started in local government, I was there 17 years. And then I moved to an arm's length body, which at that time was English Partnerships. So originally it was the Commission of New Towns, English Partnerships, and then became Homes and Communities Agency and is now Homes England. And I moved into a specific role, which was for the expansion of Milton Keynes. And I led the planning team there. So we had the planning powers from the local government, which is Milton Keynes Council, and we had the responsibility for the expansion of Milton Keynes. It was a fantastic time. The real opportunities was really introducing and I would say expanding my knowledge set, which was more around urban design and master planning. So it was very different to what I'd undertaken in local government. And I think when I was talking about being solely in the public sector, and I think when I speak to planners and I say actually it's the right to have the balance, I think all planners need the public and the private experience. And when I talk about the private experience, private sector, I'm talking about delivery, understanding the wider development process. And I say, well, actually, when I was at Homes England and HCA, I was open to that because of the very different role it had in terms of it would acquire sites, dispose of sites, take it through the planning process. So, and also we would maintain relationships with local authorities and build that network. So I was exposed to both, I would say, the public and the private sector aspect. Going back to the public sector, and the reason I say to many planning students and apprentices, why should you spend time in the public sector? It's really around having that political acumen, understanding negotiation, I would say emotional intelligence, reading the room, being able to engage with many of the public and communities, public speaking, committee experience, empathy, but also one of the top skills I say we must always remember is listening. It's really, really important. And I'm not saying that you only get this in the public sector. but actually you get a different take on it in the public sector compared to colleagues in the private sector. So I mentioned moving to English partnerships. I did a lot of work on design code. So I worked on the first design code and also inquiry by design, which is around engaging with communities and having co-design workshops. Again, really important, and actually some key skills there in terms of being able to engage and work and co-design with local communities. So I progressed within HCA and Homes England. I became a head of area, and that really was a challenge for me. It was quite an uphill learning curve. It took me out of planning, and it was more around delivery, understanding the Affordable Homes Programme, and more around the development process in terms of site acquisition, disposals, etc. So definitely a huge learning curve for me. And I would say, and I say to this day, I actually used to question myself, and I used to have quite a bit of imposter syndrome in terms of saying, this is just really challenging, really new skill set for me. But actually, I had the most amazing team at that time and previous times as well, who actually, there was nothing such as a silly question. There was a very safe space in terms of we could challenge, we could question. So it was a hugely intensive learning experience for me. So just moving forward, there were many changes, many restructures within HCA and Homes England. And part of that time, I set up a planners network. And the reason for that was to make sure that people and the planners within the profession actually had their own network. So we could understand the different areas of work that we were working in. We could share learning and we could share good practice. And we could also bring in consistency in the application of planning policy. As you know, that can be one of the downfalls in terms of giving some concerns in terms of how planning process works, etc. And then around about that time, I then started looking externally from the organisation and started looking towards the Royal Town Planning Institute, which is our professional body. And so I became involved with the General Assembly, which is the assembly that keeps the board to account, and started building up that network and the understanding of actually what the Institute does. And part of that was around, understanding the policies, understanding the governance within the Institute. So, and then where I found myself last year, I put myself forward for election. So the election is amongst our 27,000 members, and became vice president in 2023, and then last year was the president of the institution. The role is really the representative. It's the figurehead of planning. So it involves so much travel, it involves much speaking, but the really important bit is meeting members and understanding the challenges and the issues, but also the good stories and celebrating excellence. So it was an absolute whirlwind. My theme, which I think ties in today, which is around building the pipeline of planners. There's been a number of there's movement certainly from the public sector out to the private sector and the planning profession, but there's also some of the movement out of the profession itself. And we need to be encouraging career talks and including and encouraging, I would say, career advisors to start thinking and promoting planning. It's difficult. I'm not saying it's easy, but it's a worthwhile career, and it adds much, I would say, to local communities. So I'll leave it there. I'm sure there's lots of things to come out. I think planning, we're maybe in a different position to some of the other professions in terms of gender balance, and it might be interesting to unravel that. So
that's great, Lindsey. Thank you. Can I just say that you were so prolific last year? You, I'm surprised you had time to sleep. You were everywhere. Amazing. You did an amazing job.
It was. I did step down from my job. So I was head of planning at Homes England, and I just thought, actually, I really need to give this my all, and felt I would be compromised taking on the role. So I was in a very privileged position of being able to do as much as I did. So it was great.
Brilliant. Okay, that's great. And next, I'm going to introduce Zoe Cox. Zoe is Vice President of the Chartered Association of Building Engineers. So very right that she should be here today. Zoe, would you like to introduce yourself and give us...
Lovely. Thanks, Lindsey. Good afternoon, everybody. So as Lindsey's alluded to, I'm the Vice President for CABE at the moment. And I'm also a registered building inspector. So I've undertaken the RBI registration, and I'm a Class 3H and Class 4 RBI. So in terms of my journey as to how I got here, I suppose building control, similar to planning really, is very much unknown. A lot of people don't understand what we do. You're going to schools, colleges, universities. They have no idea what it is we actually do. They don't know what the job involves. They don't even know what the job title is a lot of the time. So throughout my career, it's been something that I've been really passionate about, trying to actually get the word out as to what we do. And for anybody in the audience that's possibly got a building control background, the majority of people in building control seem to fall into it. It's not something that very often many of us say, look, we want a career in this. We somehow find our way in the industry, which is fantastic because it gives us that level of diversity as well within all the members that are in the teams. So just a little bit about where my career started. So originally when I left school, I didn't know what I wanted to do. I went and did a degree in criminology and social policy, which to this day I've never really used as such, although I probably have in some ways. And halfway through my degree, I had a trip out to Dubai and we were looking at sort of tall, complex buildings. And I really got an eye for health and safety. So I undertook my NEBOSH diploma whilst I was doing my final year of my degree and ended up seeing a job advertised for health and safety in and around buildings. Didn't know really what this would involve. And it turned out that it was actually a trainee building control officer. So I applied for it, and obviously I fell into the job and landed myself this great role. So I was combining my passion, which is health and safety, and construction as well. So I worked through, obviously I worked for local authority and I became qualified. I also undertook a building engineering degree, which was run at that time by CABE or ABE at that time, because that was before the chartership. And upon completion of that degree, I was asked if I would go and deliver a couple of guest lectures and do some speaking and teach other students, which then led me on to, first of all, joining the CABE board. So I was elected on back in, I think it's about 2008. So I was obviously fairly new to the board, elected on by members. And in addition to that, I was obviously doing the course delivery, and I was offered a position at Sheffield Hallam University. So I went from doing the building control role, becoming involved with CABE, and then I moved into the academic world, which was brilliant because it meant that I could actually pass on my knowledge and my experience to those coming through. So when degree apprenticeships were developed, I actually wrote a number of the degree apprenticeships for Sheffield Hallam University. So that gave me a really good opportunity to see how academia and experience in the workplace can be really well combined. Because to me, it gives a really rounded level of education and it combines that workplace experience, it brings on maturity, and it's got a really good outcome at the end of it. So I spent quite a lot of time teaching at Sheffield Hallam, as well as obviously working alongside CABE as well. I then stepped back when I had 2 children. So that obviously took up quite a lot of my time. So then I moved obviously back in and I was co-opted back onto the board for CABE by the other board members and elected into vice president position, which is an absolute honour. And obviously within my working career, I left Sheffield Hallam and I moved back into industry. I got to a stage in my career where I thought to myself, if I don't move back into industry now, I probably never will. And that's where my passion was. So I moved into the building control world again. and I joined Quadrant. So Quadrant at that time were obviously a building control body, and they were bought out by a company called Socotec more recently. So I originally took on the head of training development role. So I was working with all of our apprentices, our trainees, our graduates, and I actually created a bespoke building control training program. So we actually have an in-house training program which develops them literally from the minute they join the job right the way through to working on sort of HRBs. So really high level work that we've got. So I'm now the technical training director for Socotec. So as well as taking on obviously the building control role, I have now taken on over different departments within our division. So I'm also back with my passion of health and safety, our fire engineering team, which obviously coordinates very, very well with the building control team. And we've also got pathology as well. So I work very, very closely with other different teams within our division, not just building control. And still working on developing, bringing people into our industry, because that's the problem at the moment with the building control world in particular, is recruitment, bringing people into the industry. There's a lot of people in the building control industry who have, over the last few years, taken early retirement, they've left the industry, and it's now our job to try and actually bring in the new, fresh starters into the industry. So I spend a lot of time going out to various different colleges, different universities, and I tell them what we do. I give examples and I explain to them about different roles within our industry that they could maybe be interested in and how they go about actually getting into that industry. So we try and do a lot of work to try and develop and enhance the amount of people that we get coming into the building control industry or the construction industry as a whole. So that's obviously something that I'm sort of really passionate about, given my training and also technical background, which is, I think, quite a sort of a unique combination of skills. And also my incorporation of health and safety as well, which I've also got a master's degree in. So a combination of sort of the academic perspective and the technical has led me to sort of where I am today. And it's a real sort of privilege and an honour. And when I describe sort of my career path, it's when you go from criminology to health and safety to building control. But actually, excluding the criminology, it does link in really, really well. And it's a career that I've always thoroughly enjoyed. And it's something that I'd like to obviously continue and push forward for the future. So thank you for inviting me today, Lindsey, today. It was a pleasure to be here.
That's great, Zoe. Thanks so much. It's interesting you say about you were started by just talking about the industry and being invited to places and then ended up lecturing. It seems to be quite a common little pattern that. I exactly the same thing happened to me. I did keep a foot in both camps because I've been in practice as well as lecturing. But it's interesting that that's a role as well. The other thing is you've just highlighted really. The same as Caroline and Lindsey in that it's trying to promote the industry and the roles out there, because if we're looking at schools, you know, the teachers have got no idea most of the time as to what the professions entail. So it's very difficult to promote something when you don't really know what the end target is going to be, or in fact, maybe what you're talking about to the school children from the point of view of teachers. So the next thing I'd like to do is introduce our committee members, and they're going to introduce themselves. I'll say really quickly, my background is I'm a chartered quantity surveyor and a chartered building engineer. So we've got a huge range across the professions here today, which is amazing. Liz, Elizabeth Williams-Defoe would like to, if you could introduce yourself now, Liz, and tell us a little bit about yourself.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Elizabeth Williams-Defoe, and I'm a Senior Development Manager for PA Housing, which is a housing association. Like many of our panel here today, I was fortunate to have exposure to the built environment. One of my grandfathers, my mum's dad, worked in construction with the Salvation Army when he's invited over from the Caribbean. And my grandpa, my dad's dad, was a television engineer. My dad actually trained and went on to be an electrical engineer himself, so testing and installing fuse boxes, both in commercial and residential properties. And I was fortunate and had the privilege to go on site with my dad in the 1980s and early 90s, of which, of course, you wouldn't have the opportunity to do today. So I was given the opportunity to train within social housing back in '99 with the Guinness Trust, which is now the Guinness Partnership and National Housing Association, which included maintenance, housing management, and new build asset management. I then went on to work in regeneration under the former London Development Agency, who's now absorbed within the Greater London Authority, or the GLA, if you're a Londoner, or the London Mayor's Office. So my educational background is I have a first degree in maintenance and housing management, and I have a postgraduate degree in urban regeneration and management. I am currently appointed as Vice Chair for CABE for Women since our inception on the 6th of March 2022. And I'm also nominated and appointed as Regional Honorary Treasurer for CABE for the Southern Region, which includes London and the whole of the South East of England. My current role allows me to represent, promote, and provide advanced knowledge for women in the industry as an enhancement to my employer PA Housing and my team, my Development Directorate, and CABE for Women. I am really passionate about the built environment and people, and my day-to-day tasks include encouraging and facilitating the cooperation between the construction professionals in all disciplines of the built environment and across genders, ages, and ranges. Effectively, what I do is I project manage new build projects in London and the South East and in the Midlands for my house association, representing as the client. I work with contractors to lead new build construction projects from inception to completion by consulting with residential and business communities on scheme designs for new build, refurbishment and stock transfer improvement projects. Since I became a CABE member back in 2009, I have benefited from the quality of training provided, which complements my experience within physical urban regeneration, affordable housing, construction development and project management. As Vice Chair and on the behalf of the panel, we hope you are enjoying the experiences shared today. So please feel free to ask questions in the Q&A at the end of the session. Thank you.
That's brilliant, Liz. Thanks. It's funny. I'm going to introduce Jane Hall next. There's a thread here when Caroline mentioned about her dad and the influence he had. Liz to say, I'm exactly the same. So I think Jane is going to mention that too. So I'd like to introduce Jane Hall next. Jane is recently taken up a position with Hunter's Architects, and she might want to mention that because that's quite interesting in itself.
Hello, everybody, and thanks for joining this little lunchtime session today. And as Liz said, I hope you're getting something from it, if only to find out what we're up to. But yeah, my name's Jane Hall, and from a very early age, I've always wanted to be an architect. When I was 8 years old, that's what I wanted to do. And I did, after leaving school, I got a position with a local firm of architects and went on day release to college. And you know, I never went further than being an architectural technician because I never went to university full time. But I had a very nice career there, and I worked for in private architecture, and then I moved across to the local authority's architects department, which was actually run by an architect. They don't really exist any longer, but at that time, you know, there were very, you know, large multidisciplinary teams within the local authority themselves, and that was my first taste of working for a local authority. Then I spent a little bit of time working in my own little consultancy of 12 years. And when I had a couple of children, I was looking for a more sort of steady and flexible working environment. And I saw an advert for building control trainee. So sort of 20 years into my construction career, I changed tack and started up, you know, afresh as a building control inspector training with the local authority. It's very interesting because it was, you know, it had always been a mystery to me, building control, you know, because it was very much, you know, they knew what they wanted, and it was them to know and us to find out. And so working on the, you know, changing over to the other side was a big eye opener, and I learned a lot, and I thoroughly enjoyed the role there. It was absolutely fascinating, and my employer allowed me to, like Zoe, I did my degree when I was 38 through the CABE route. Becoming a member of CABE, opened out, training possibilities for me that I wouldn't normally have had at that time. A degree apprenticeships weren't a thing back then. And so I achieved my degree, and my career in building control has gone from strength to strength. And I soon became a manager at a small local authority. I got involved with LABC because they were very supportive, another supportive organisation. And I was a newbie manager, and had lots of questions, and it enabled me to build my network. And to my surprise, I was invited to stand as president, and I became the first female president of LABC in 2016, which was a huge honour for me, and again, another eye-opener. All the time I'd maintained my membership of CABE, and I was involved in a local level, with our local regional group, and always went to their little CPD sessions and tried to support where I could. And I've always had my eye open on learning more, gaining my knowledge. And I think this is, that sort of interest and curiosity is something that drives us in our, quest for sort of, our career path and gaining of knowledge and understanding of how everything ticks along. And I soon where did I go next? Transformation in local authorities. That was something very interesting. We had to merge our building control teams together. For what was it? I've forgotten the word for it. That's my age. There we are. So, but yes. So we went from a small local authority to a merger of sort of four or five local authorities. In the building control team, and I had a sort of leadership role there. Meanwhile, I was invited to join the board of CABE, so I sat on the board of CABE, and following on from that, I was also nominated and elected to the presidential team. So I was CABE president in 2020. So that is, again, very much an honour and sort of unexpected. It wasn't something I was, ruthlessly ambitious and strived for. It was something an opportunity that fell into my path, and from there, my career has grown and developed. I've spent some time doing a little bit of supporting the planning enforcement team at a unitary authority. I was head of the built environment enforcement team, so a very regulatory role, looking after the building control team planning enforcement. And I learned a lot in that role because I'm not a planner, but my management skills came to play there. And from there, I spent a little bit of time in private sector building control, again, looking at the other side of things, slightly different sort of focuses and priorities, looking in a commercial environment as opposed to a local authority environment. And now my career has, nearly forgot to mention Hertfordshire Building Control, where I spent a marvellous couple of years and would have stayed there other than sort of personal circumstances at the time driving my decision making. But I was head of their quality and compliance team there, and very much involved in preparing the team for the new building control regime and registration of building inspectors. But I decided to step down from that. Really just needed a break from things that were going on in my private life. And that didn't last very long, because once people heard that I was out and about, job offers started to roll in. And now my career's gone full circle, and I'm back in architecture, working for Hunters Architects. I've been there 3 weeks, nearly, not quite. Yes, my enthusiasm for my job and the fact that I've had a very satisfying career, that is the message I want to send to people, to bring people in and say, you can do whatever you want. It isn't Bob the Builder. Construction isn't just about dirty, mucky building sites. There are so many threads, so many areas of specialism that you can go into. You can have a very, very satisfying career. for a lifetime.
That's brilliant, Jane. Thanks so much. It's interesting you mentioned local authority and the how detrimental the decline in the multidisciplinary team has been in local authority, which has a knock-on effect actually, because as a young surveyor, I spent some time in local authority, and as Lindsey alluded to earlier, it's a great background to start your career in, even because you get to understand things from a completely different. As soon as you go into commercial, it's sort of all hands on deck without much time. I shouldn't say that. Local authority is very busy as well, but there's a strict way of operating, and it's a really good learning structure, I feel. And you've got the support of the staff with you too. And of course, what's happened in local authorities meant that we don't have that. We can't have training positions, or there's very few training positions there, and as there used to be. But great, thanks, Jane. Next, I'm going to introduce Anna, and leading on from local authority actually is head of LABC, head of engagement, and Anna is if you'd like to introduce yourself, Anna, that would be great.
Thank you very much. Well, I too fell into building control, as we do. My dad was a geography teacher, and if he'd had his way, I would have done a planning a geography degree and then become a planner. But I don't think I was ever tactful enough to be a planner or diplomatic enough. So I fortunately found a job as a trainee building inspector with Watford Council, and I started in 1985, the same week as the building regs came in 1985, and the Building Act was enacted. So it's been a while. So I did that. I worked for 6 local authorities, and during that time I did a joint diploma, which was the IAAS, which is obviously what CABE was years and years ago, joint with them and the Institute of Building Control. So I was really involved in the Institute of Building Control, and then that merged with the RICS. So by default, I became a chartered surveyor, chartered building control surveyor. I was chair of the England and Wales board for the RICS. That was a busy time for me. So I did that. So 23 years as an actual real surveyor. And then I moved to LABC. So Local Authority Building Control, we're an umbrella organisation, and we look after and work with all the building control teams in all of the councils across England and Wales, and slightly further afield as well. And I went there to set up the training department, because we weren't training enough people. We weren't training anybody. So set that up, which I loved, absolutely loved training. I trained Jane. Some of Jane's training was me. So that was fun, and I did that for a long time. I moved into business development. I then became head of engagement. So my job is basically just talking for a living, which obviously I love. But interestingly, in the last month, I have now, a good chunk of my job is now back in training. So I'm going to be training our level 3 students, which are technicians, tech support trainees, things like that, coming into the profession, and I absolutely love it. And also it means I get to be really involved with our academy. So LABC has a building control academy. So yes, I disagree with your point, Lindsey, about local authorities not training people. We've got 200 trainees. Incredibly, we had 2,000 applicants over the different recruitment processes that we've done. So we've got 200 trainees employed by us at LABC. They do 1 day a week online learning on our learning programme. They have 1 day a week to do their independent study and their assessments and things, which is great, because we never had that, did we? When we were doing day release, we had to just go to work and do our homework at the evenings and weekends. And then 3 days a week, they are hosted by our local authority building control team. So they actually learn the job. They go out on site. They're taught how to plan check. They're taught how to do all the other things that the job involves, from real people with years and years of expertise. And they're doing really well. And we're now getting them, the first cohort are now all registered. They're all now class 2 RBIs, and are, beginning their careers properly. So we're kind of ready for our next cohort, and it's great. I did a careers fair on Tuesday at my old school in Hertfordshire, Talking, I mean, I talked to people. I converted one person into going to look at planning as a career. You'll be pleased to hear. But loads of interest in the built environment, but very little knowledge at that stage for them about what kind of roles there are. So hopefully I put some of them right. But I love it. That's what I really love about I guess being older. It gives you the confidence to go and tell people what you've done and why other people might like it too, doesn't it? So that's it.
Oh, that's great, Anna, thanks. Yeah, it's interesting, amazing to hear the numbers of building control. I'm just thinking from another point of view, the other professional disciplines need to take a leaf out of your book then in that case. That's amazing. Really good news, that. Okay, so without further ado, I'd like to introduce Julie Brown-Rigby next. Julie is currently, as well as acting within her areas within the CHPK group. She's also a CABE assessor. Julie, would you like to introduce yourself, please?
Yep, okay. Hi, everybody. I'm Julie Brown-Rigby. Well, I've always been in construction. I don't know any other career. I started off when I left school. I worked for a large construction company, and I learned every aspect of construction. I was trained as an architectural technician, much like Jane, and I too fell into building control. At the time when I went into building control, there was a lot of, we were in another recession, a lot of architectural practices were going under, and I thought now's the time to sort of maybe have a career change. And I was lucky enough to be offered a post as an assistant BCO at Norwich City Council, and I went from there. So yeah, I've moved my way through. I joined CABE in 2004 because I thought that was the right thing to do. And I worked my way through from being an assistant BCO up to a manager of a local authority. And I have to say, I only jumped ship 2 years ago. I was manager for 7 years, and I just thought, I need a challenge. I need to do something more. So I went back to the private sector. And I've now been in the private sector again for 2 years. And the role of building control has changed drastically in the last couple of years with all our competencies. I'm actually a registered RBI as well. But my role these days is more to do with consultancy. So I'm acting in what I suppose is a relatively new role, or the title is fairly new. I'm called a BRPD, which is a Building Regs Principal Designer Advisor. And for those of you that work in building control, you'll know that the profession to some extent has been split, and that now when you're on site as an RBI, it's very difficult to give advice to architects, builders, etc. My role is not to be, I don't design the things for them, but I show them the way to actually how they can become compliant before they take up their apply for their building regulations application. So by the time they get to that stage, it's a fait accompli, and there should be no surprises to them that they've actually gone down the route to compliance, because it's changed so much in this time. It's very difficult. A lot of architects don't understand the process, a lot of builders don't, and people are very wary about being what's now called a duty holder, which is the owner of the property or the person that's instigating the work. But I've always loved working in construction. I've always loved working in building control. I'm very keen on mentoring and training. I really enjoy passing on my knowledge to those that want to come into the profession. Someone took the time to train me years ago, and I feel it's very important to actually give that back. But I'm not going to carry anymore, because we're going to lose time for anybody to have questions and answers. So I'm going to finish there.
Oh, that's great. Thanks, Julie. That's great, interesting to hear as well. And what I'd like to do now is to we have one question that's been sent directly to us, and it's what are the major reasons for the slow change in the move towards gender balance within the industry? So, based on the theme, I'm guessing that we've got an International Women's Day. What does the panel feel? Are the barriers maybe, or what's been the main thing you think that has just not allowed us to change as quickly as we'd like to change that balance? Okay, so Caroline, do you want to go first?
Yeah, again, these questions always come from an element of a personal viewpoint, but I've never had any barriers. So I say that boldly. There have been instances, there have been certain comments, there have been unpleasant occasions, but who's to say that doesn't happen to men? I think there's this element sometimes that we maybe think that men have it, really, really nice, and they do have it tough sometimes. So I think there's that bit about barriers are often put in place by yourself. I think sometimes we've heard somebody said imposter syndrome today. So I certainly think that at times the only person holding me back was me.
Yes, that's interesting. So you think maybe it's more perception of the industry, or
I think so. I started off today by saying you can't be what you can't see. So I think there's a part to play in us, and we've all kind of mentioned it, supporting perhaps local schools, young people, to be able to share what experience and opportunities are out there. But everybody in every discipline is fighting this game, I think. So you have to also have the desire to do it. So I think that's another thing where we don't see what we're saying about a gender balance. Do people want to do it? So they might know about it and they might have chosen, because there's things that I've chosen in my time to say, actually, that's not for me. So I think there's some really interesting questions around that, and that's certainly from my personal perception is that perspective is that often the barrier has been myself.
okay, that's great. That's great. I'll go to Anna next. Anna was next, so hands up.
So yeah, I agree. I think most of the barriers are perceived. I've never experienced an actual barrier. I've experienced a lot of, verbal abuse, but fortunately I'm fairly resilient and it bounces off and I'm fairly capable of giving it back. Not everybody is, so it's not the career for everybody. But it's got such a bad image, hasn't it, as just being, muddy and dirty and sweary and physical and all the rest of it. And I think people don't understand that there are so many roles available. Wouldn't it be great if we had more people actually building things? That would be that would be amazing, because there are actually lots of us telling people how to build them and designing it for them, but not actually many women doing the job. But
No,
we are getting there. I think
yeah.
it was 4% women in building control when I started, and now 19% of our trainees are women. So that's better than it was.
It's definitely a move forward. I think as I say, I think it was 2% when I started within the profession generally, particularly surveying, and that's well up now to 13, 14%. So that's really good. I'll go to Lindsey next.
Thank you. I was sorry. I was just reading Sandy's question, and hi, Sandy. It was very. We might move on to that hopefully, but I just want to say planning is actually in a pretty good place in terms of a gender balance. So some of the planning statistics. So in 2022, we reckoned an average of 22,000 planners, of which 40% are women. And in fact, when we start looking at the younger age group, we've actually got a pretty good balance in terms of female to male. Where we see a potential problem, is actually more senior manager roles. And actually there's fewer women in those roles. So from a profession, we're in a pretty good place. I would say we haven't got as minority balance as we would like, which would reflect our communities, but in terms of the balance of female male, we're pretty healthy.
That's great. Thank you. Sorry, I've just realised that I can see the questions here. If I can just pause for a second on that subject and come back to it at the end, maybe. So Sandy, who I was hoping she was going to be here today. She's had a lot going on, and she's just recovering with a leg, bless her too. So I hope everything's going all right, Sandy. But she mentions thought it might be useful to flag up the CIOB report on attitudes towards towards construction careers that came out 4 days ago. Just 3 points. 68% young people have a positive view on construction. Great news. But 47% said no construction advice at school. That would be in keeping with our experiences, I think. And 53% think construction is not welcoming. So that's interesting in itself. I'll come on to the next point here. But before I do, actually, I'll just come to I was just trying to think who's next. Zoe, would you like to carry on with that topic of perceived barriers, or why you think that we're not moving as quickly as we'd like?
Yeah, I mean, personally, again, similarly echo to what the other ladies have said, in that I've never really encountered particular barriers as such. However, I do think a lot of this might stem back from, like we've just seen on that the question, the slide of 47% in terms of the schools, because I went to a careers day at a secondary school. And I'd set up a stand for construction, for building control, and I was promoting those topic areas. On the other side of the room, there was hairdressing, there was beauty, and literally there was a split between the room. The girls went over to the hair and beauty, and all the boys came over to mine. I went, hang on a minute, no, hang on, why? Listen to what I'm going to tell you about what our industry actually is. And by the end of it, we'd actually managed to convince probably 20 to 30% of the girls that actually there are careers in our area for them that they would potentially enjoy. The perception is just muddy, filthy building sites. And I think that's part of what needs to change, is the fact that we need to address this from school, from education, and actually tell people what it is we do.
That's brilliant, brilliant, Zoe. Yes, there's another interesting question here from. Sorry, can you just bear with me for a second? Sorry, Faye Banks. Faye has said that she's entered the career quite late in her profession, that she said she's 35 and started last year. She has 2 children and grateful for the support she has from her employer, but very keen to hear how other women who have entered the profession at a stage where perhaps they had young children have managed balancing careers and other responsibilities. Would anybody like to? Jane, would you like to?
Yes, yeah. I can from personal experience, and I was going to answer the other question of, you know, the stereotypes and the traditional roles of women as mainly as the main caregivers. You know, that we're the ones that you know, put our careers on hold to raise a family and things. We don't. I mean, I've seen change over the course of my 40-year career, and there is more equity now with parents and young men being able to have paternity leave and things. But yes, I actually was a single mum when I came into building control, and that was, you know, that was the driver of me actually making a career change, was having 2 preschool children, being on my own and needing a full-time job, but allowed me some flexibility. So I went for local authority because they tended to be a type of employer that did support you know, flexible working and things. But yes, I mean, I believe that you know, the laws on equality that have evolved over the years mean that employers are beginning to be more supportive and valuing the knowledge and the experience and the skill set that their women do bring to the workplace, and they want to keep hold of that. So yes, if you're fortunate enough to have a good employer, then, you know, stick with that, because, you know, they will support you and encourage you and support you back in. The other thing is to you know, I don't know, the advice I gave is just, you know, to crack on with it and not let anything get in your way, you know. And but yes, it is still problematic, I believe. And I think, again, you know, it's been said by others that some of us do put those limitations on by ourselves, and we think that we can't do both. We can do both, but you have to balance that. Well-being, health and well-being are still you know, have to look after that as well. But yeah, construction does offer.
Sorry, I have to say something. I think with construction, it depends exactly on your role too. So, and and the support you have bringing up young children. Let's be honest, yeah, some of us maybe haven't had that support, and others have, and that makes a difference. But it's made me change the positions I took up, because as a quantity surveyor, I couldn't work for a contractor while I was travelling around the country. As soon as I had a family, to be honest, it changed the role that I decided that that I was okay to take. Sorry, Anna, would you like to comment?
I had my son while I was a senior building control surveyor. I was really lucky. I still have got a really an amazing husband who's always seen us as equals and never kind of expected me to give up everything to have his children, which was really helpful. And I've also had the most amazing managers and colleagues. And everywhere I've ever worked, whether it's local authorities or LABC, families come first. And if you need to not be at work because there's something else happened, that's what you do. And that should apply to every industry, shouldn't it? And every organisation, as far as it possibly can, because mums and dads are equally as important in looking after kids.
No, it's true. It's true. I'm conscious of the fact we've got a minute left, and Anna has provided a really good question too. It's in regard to welfare facilities on site, and the sort of things that we have to endure when we are on site. And she's wondering whether CABE would be interested in running a campaign for better welfare facilities on site. That's a really good suggestion, Anna, and something that I'll definitely put to the CABE board. And in fact, Zoe's here, so Zoe can take that on herself maybe and take that back to CABE. I'm really sorry, we are running out of time, and it's always the case in an event like this. I'd like to thank Caroline, Lindsey, and Zoe for being our panelists today. Thank you so much. Thanks also to Sandy, who's there remotely, and I wish we could have brought her in, but we aren't able to do that technically today. Thank you to the committee, and thank you to Rosemary for accommodating this and allowing us to run the celebration of International Women's Day. And we're hopefully providing an insight, and even just by the discussions we've had today about everybody's roles and their experiences, I'm hoping that our audience can take something away positive. And if they have any questions, if they'd like to send them, if I say initially to Rosemary at CABE, is that all right, Rosemary? And then maybe Rosemary can decide who the best person will be to answer that. But thank you, everybody. Have a great day tomorrow, because International Women's Day is actually tomorrow. And I hope you continue celebrating today and the rest of the weekend. Thanks very much for attending.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Lindsey. Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone.